Stay, phone. Stay. Okay. Page 11. Roman numeral 3. So this section is titled, it's the first of the 4 characteristics. And I'll write it in the chat. It's called Gods and Humans Together. Gods. Oh, it's not working. Oh, probably because my thing's not on. So remember that in the epic world, the difference between an epic and a novel is the fact that gods and humans come together to work together to do whatever it is they're doing. In a novel, the gods aren't involved necessarily, or not obviously. Okay, taking up the first feature, what I have spoken of as the penetration of the veil, separating the human from the divine, we are immediately confronted by the uniqueness of the epic in bringing the gods and mortals, highlight this, bringing gods and mortals together for a common work. Everybody has their highlighter and their writing utensil? To accomplish this extension of ordinary reality, highlight, epic poets have to open their imaginations to an arena of sufficient scope that the gods may enter. Stop. As Fry has pointed out, this event is for the poet a crisis situation, usually the crowning work of his life. Seen from this perspective, highlight, the invocation to the muse, either overt or implied, is no mere device, but a necessary act. It calls for supernatural aid in a heroic endeavor, indicating the presence beyond the hero of a bard telling the tale. Stop. Okay, this is the poet asking for the gods' help. That's all there is to it. Because the poet knows that to write something that is so big, so epic, he's not going to be able to do it by himself. He has to have help from the divine. In fact, that's what she goes on to say here. Poets know their dependency upon celestial help in attempting the epic task. Consequently, many times they make their invocation, their call, a part of the epic ritual. For example, sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, Homer begins, and tell me, O muse, the man of many turnings. That's the beginning of the Odyssey. Tell me the causes now, O muse, Virgil implores at the beginning of the Aeneid. Can anger black as this prey on the minds of heaven? That's the beginning of, that is Paradise Lost by Milton. And as Dante approaches the paradisal regions, he feels so much of the strain of becoming a conduit, circle that word, through which the celestial power runs, that he invokes 2 peaks of Apollo's Mount Parnassus, both the Muses and Apollo. Okay, stop. So, actually I wasn't highlighting. Conduit means vessel or channel, if you want to write that down. O power divine, grant me in song to show the blessed realm's image, shadow though it be, stamped on my brain. Even Milton's invocation, sing heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or Sinai did inspire that shepherd. Though it's biblical in reference, and indeed, as many suggest, may be addressed to the Holy Spirit, nevertheless gives evidence here, as do all the other petitions, that their authors are aware of having been assigned a muse. These circle supplications. Supplications means prayers, are not mere conventions. Conventions means characteristics. Each is a genuine cry for aid from poets who have intuited the possibilities within their stories. At the same time, they apprehend, which means come to know, the impossibility of telling them alone. More recent invocations, if you'll circle invocation, it means call. More recent calls. The opening lines of novel epics undertaking mammoth tasks. They may be less obvious calls to the muses, but they adopt a deliberately incantatory tone. Okay, so that means like a chanting tone. that hints at bardic utterances. We know bards are poets. So she uses the word bard and poet sort of interchangeably. Call me Ishmael. Okay, that's from the beginning of Moby Dick. There was a man and a dog too this time, and even the beginning of a book called Beloved, about a slave, a lady who was just coming out of slavery, and she had to choose to either kill her children or send them to slavery. And she ends up killing one of her daughter, Beloved, instead of sending her into slavery. Two of her boys get away from her. But yeah. So it says 124, that's the house they live in, was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. So this is Beloved's haunting of the house because of what her mother had done, and she didn't understand. These strange and arresting runic lines take on the overtones of charms spoken not so much to ward off evil as to summon help. Highlight this. Whether the appeal is to the gods or to an indwelling spirit or to an angelic guide, like Beloved, it is to call to a spiritual power with the ability to reshape and transform events in memory. Stop. The establishment of an arena in which the divine and human can come together to work at the task of history is, as we have indicated, the veritable creation of the epos, which, if you'll circle epos and then underline epic word, because that's the definition, providing a model for the moral universe, highlight moral universe, within which human beings carry on their lives. Keep highlighting. In no other genre are poets so closely associated with the source of their inspiration. They are able to speak the epic word because they have been allowed to see the physical order as permeated by the spiritual. In a sense, everything is sacred. As a consequence, they see the divine aura as part of the action. One of the causes that makes up the story, keep highlighting, within the broad scope of epic, the gods enter history to become the hero's helpers, their stern mentors, advocates, and contenders. Stop. Okay, so permeated in that highlighting section is, permeated means to put oneself into, kind of like diffusion. The gods diffuse themselves into the moral universe, or the mortal universe. Aura, it's like an essence or a halo. These deities rarely appear in the other genres, but allow the protagonist to remain at a safer distance from the celestial magnetism. So I'm at the top of 13 now. Highlight this. Tragedy, for instance, portrays the hero cut off from the gods, bearing their oracles, condemned to follow out the divinely destined Moira, but remaining in a sense a pawn of immortals. Keep highlighting. Comic protagonists are either in an infernal world, devoid of the numinous, or in a paradisal comedy lifted up. Okay, stop highlighting. All right, so Moira, if you'll circle that, Moira means fate. Next, 2 lines down from Moira, you see the word numinous. Numinous means, and I'll write it down here, it's kind of long, indicating the presence of the divine. What's wrong here? I spelled indicating wrong. Indicating. Did I spell it wrong? Yeah, I did. Indicating, sorry. I was saying dictation or something. Indictating. It's indicating the presence of the divine. That's what numinous means. Okay. lifted up to heights of benediction by a force never directly seen or known. The lyric mode depicts what Keats describes as the wakeful anguish of the soul at the still center when it feels its own separation from plenitude, though in rare instances lyric speaks of consummation as being gathered into God's holy fire. In the in the distinct world of epic, in contradistinction to these other modes, the gods descend to cooperate directly with the mortal protagonist and the poet in fashioning an order in which myth can be reinterpreted to redeem history. The gods come down bodily from Mount Olympus to the battlefield in the Iliad, grieve for human suffering, quarrel over the outcome of the war, sometimes actually suffer wounds. In the Odyssey, before Athena is allowed to intervene to help with Odysseus' nostos means homecoming, Poseidon is permitted to assuage his wrath by harrying the warrior and his unfortunate men. So nostos means homecoming, if you want to circle that. No, that's Greek. Some of these words are Greek, like Moira and nostos. Assuage means to take care of his wrath. He wants to get his wrath out, so he wants to assuage it. Harrying means to harass the warrior and his unfortunate men. And though the gods are more removed in the Aeneid, except for Venus, and exert their power chiefly by means of oracles, prophecies, visions, and dreams, Aeneas is permitted in one instance a theophany, so it's where the gods reveal themselves. Venus removes the scales from his eyes and shows him the Olympian deities busily hovering over the doomed city, Troy. He is unable to see in one horrifying vision all the dimensions of what is destroying Troy. Look, where you see high masonry thrown down, stone torn from stone, with billowing smoke and dust. Neptune is shaking from their beds the walls that his great trident pried up, undermining, toppling the whole city down. Page 14. Y'all still with me? I have one person who has their video on. Thank you, Tian. Aeneas sees the truth. Neptune, Juno, Pallas Tritonia, Jupiter himself, the great immortals that govern human history, are all working together to bring Ilium, which is another name for Troy, down in flames. And in some sense that he does not understand, despite his horror and grief, Aeneas recognizes that it is right for Troy to fall. Not only the power, but the wisdom of the gods has decreed the city's doom. This brief unveiling is admittedly the only instance in the poem in which a mortal is permitted to see the divine design, though it is far from being the only encounter Aeneas has with the gods and their oracles and prophets. His mother Venus intervenes throughout the epic, and the reader is allowed to go with her on her frequent visits to Olympus to overhear Jupiter and Juno quarreling about the outcome of the Trojan quest. Okay, so the Aeneid is a Roman epic, and so the gods' names are changed from the Greek gods to the Roman gods. The Iliad and the Odyssey are Greek epics, so we have the Greek gods. They're the same people, but they just have changed names. In fact, the only god whose name stays the same between the Greek and the Roman is Apollo. Later in Paradise Lost, Milton, so Paradise Lost was written in the 18th century, so quite many centuries after the first original three epics. Later in Paradise Lost, Milton uses this device of overhearing the divine plan in the episode in heaven in which the dialogue permitted God the Father and God the Son. So the reader is permitted to see and understand the justice of the heavenly dispensation. In this poem, as in Dante's Inferno, angels are the heralds of supernatural action in the world and take part in the actual events. Highlight this, please. With the advent, which means coming, with the advent of the modern worldview, however, the divine order most often manifests itself in the epic through signs in nature, in accord with the tradition of verisimilitude to which the novel is committed. Stop. The great whale in Moby Dick and the ancient bear and the dog lion in Go Down Moses represent the active presence in the world of the wisdom of the Creator, like the Leviathan and the behemoth of the book of Job in the Bible. In the late 20th century, the magical realism of Latin American novelists and the spiritualism inherited by African American writers are beginning to make a more overt connection between modernity and the more ancient times, and hence are bringing the novel over more surely into the epic cosmos. It appears then that in whatever period of history, highlight this. It appears then that in whatever period of history the epic arises, it carries with it its own cultural symbols in this active sense of a numinous presence. Stop. Okay, so the way that the divine interjects itself into human lives has changed since the Greek gods, the Roman gods. All right, it's changed to be more symbols of nature. Like, for example, in Moby Dick, it's the big white whale, and he represents some sort of godhead that Captain Ahab is trying to kill. We have, like, for example, the African American writer I just talked about, Beloved. We have the haunting of the baby beloved. So it's a spirit, not a god. We have the lion, we have the bear, and Go Down Moses. So we have these massive signs from nature that become the interjection of the divine. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second.